Welcome everyone to the 2022 Google Cloud Startup Summit. This year, Google Cloud started hosting a monthly VC AMA series, and we're excited that this month's AMA is a part of the Startup Summit. We hope you'll enjoy today's session, and we encourage you to come check out the ongoing AMA series where Google Cloud will host different VCs each month. We have linked out to these sessions in the description below. We have an exciting panel today, and we'll be discussing things like cloud, data, and the opportunity for these technologies to disrupt legacy industries. My name is Derek Zanutto. I'm a general partner at CapitalG, Alphabet's independent growth fund. I lead investments in data, cybersecurity, and enterprise software, and have had the privilege of investing in and partnering with the companies like Armis, Calibra, Databricks, Dataiku, Uber, and Airbnb. Some other CapitalG portfolio companies include Stripe, CrowdStrike, Freshworks, Duolingo, and UiPath. Joining us today on the panel are Alison Lange Engel, a partner at Greycroft who works with portfolio companies to help them scale. She focuses on early-stage fintech investments, including Cardless, Seros, Klasha, Public.com, Spectrum Labs, Toggle, and Wayscript. Before joining Greycroft, Alison held senior marketing leadership roles at Stripe, LinkedIn, and Microsoft. Greycroft portfolio companies include Branch, Fetch, Icertis, Picasso, Public, and Thrive Market. Also joining us today is Matt Turck, a partner at FirstMark who focuses on early-stage enterprise and B2B investing. A former founder who sold his company to Oracle, he's also active in the broader tech community, running Data-Driven NYC and Hardwired NYC, and he's an investor in companies like Dataiku and Digital Currency Group. Other FirstMark portfolio companies include Shopify, Pinterest, Airbnb, and Carta. So we'll jump right in. First question for the team here is, it's an exciting time in cloud and big data. There have been some incredible innovations in the past couple of years. And of course, the pandemic was a dramatic accelerant in the adoption of both cloud and big data technologies. Alison, if we could start with you, it would be great to get your view on where we started before the pandemic, where we are now, and where we are going with respect to the adoption of cloud and big data technologies.
Great. Thanks, Derek. Yeah, it's so much has happened since the pandemic. And I think what's really notable is that obviously the cloud has been around for 16, 15 years at this point. And so the acceleration pre-pandemic to now, I think, has been dramatic, but we were well on our way at this point. We have a company in our portfolio, Icertis, who had a vision around the cloud and contract management going back 10 plus years. So I'm sure Matt has the same. And so cloud has been a foundation for a long time. But I think what we've seen is both for enterprises, the massive appetite and demand and dependence for cloud and data to not only build new products, but also to meet the world now that we're in with virtual workers all over the world. So connecting with workers, hiring them, onboarding them, these are all, kind of the common world for enterprises. And at the same time, if you're running a consumer brand, you are really trying to deliver real-time products and real-time growth. And all of that is dependent upon having data and data that you can tune into products and services that are deeply personal. So I think we were on our way over 10 years kind of building products and platforms in the cloud. And I think that clearly has accelerated on both an enterprise dimension and on a consumer product dimension as well. In terms of where we're going, it feels like these days it's warp speed around everything, in new technologies, especially around blockchain and just the innovation in cryptocurrencies. It's been kind of a wild few weeks, as we know, and few months in the markets. But I think the foundational technologies are here to stay, and that will be a whole new layer of opportunity that's created. But obviously, the cloud innovation is what laid the foundation.
Absolutely. Thanks, Alison. And Matt, maybe turning to you. Cloud has already had a massive impact on many industries. What are the most exciting greenfield opportunities for cloud and data technologies to disrupt legacy industries today?
Yeah, so I think the good news is that, as cliche as it may sound, we just getting started, as Alison was saying, 15, 16, 70 years into the whole thing. We just getting to the broad majority adoption of cloud. this clearly got accelerated with the pandemic, where in just a couple of years, it feels like we progressed by, a decade or two in terms of like the sense of urgency around needing to move to the cloud and embrace new technologies. There was a separate, related but separate phenomenon that started actually before the pandemic and has been accelerating since in the data world, which is a rise of the modern data stack, which is very much focused around the cloud data warehouses, including very much Google BigQuery, which is this concept of a standardized way of handling data in the enterprise, from getting raw data all the way to analytics. And why this matters is because it's unlocked a lot of opportunities to build data and AI products. If you were trying to build an enterprise AI company as recently as like 3, 4, 5 years ago, you would go to a customer and you would come up with all of this fancy talk and there's buzzwords around AI and like we can do this, we can do that, and then your customer would say, well, okay, that sounds great, but like actually we don't know where our data is. We cannot provide it to you. We don't know who has access to it, who has the authorization, who has the right to provide access, give authorization to access the data. And that was a big mess. So you had like a whole generation of companies that tried to build those vertical solutions that were just not able to, because most customers did not have their data house in order, if you want. With the rise of the modern data stack, all of this has changed and it's still changing, it's accelerating. So that opens up a huge world of opportunities around creating vertical specific solutions that can leverage the modern data stack and the data warehouses without having to worry about the plumbing, but just focusing on what is specifically interesting to that vertical. So that's across the board. That's insurance, financial services, even the government. And you see this rise in this acceleration of vertical specific data and AI companies, which I find very interesting and exciting as an investor.
Absolutely. That's funny, Alison and Matt. We spent a lot of time at CapitalG talking to the Global 2000 CIOs that interact with GCP or other business units within Alphabet. And it's funny that, despite having invested billions of dollars in their data infrastructure over the past 10 plus years, it's hard to find a CIO who thinks they figured it out and things are working super well. There's still very early innings around optimizing the data stack and getting insights off of the big data assets all these companies have. So it's quite exciting for a lot of startups that are attacking those problems, as you guys all noted. Maybe a next question for the team here. You all get pitched a lot. We all do. And that level of exposure gives us a bird's eye view on the ways in which the data and AI landscapes are changing rapidly. Alison, to go back to you, what is something you've seen a company do lately that really blew you away?
Sure. And I think it kind of ties back to some of the trends in the pandemic. I think the application of AI technologies into customer service is a really interesting area. And there's a company that we invested in called Lena AI that took that to kind of servicing employees. And they basically built what's akin to a Siri for employees. They now have 3 million people on the platform. And it's really about real-time insights and support for employees around the world. And so this concept of applying AI, and this also goes back to natural language processing, which we may or may not cover on this AMA, but maybe another time. But the idea that you're meeting people where they are, I think, is a fundamental part of what has shifted. And it's harnessing data and AI, and obviously leveraging the cloud that allows you to do that, where you can respond real time to employees or customers or users. And I think that immediacy is just a critical part of not only building trust if you're for an outward facing brand of either enterprise or consumer scope, and also just among your employees. Now we're living in a forever distributed workforce to some extent, or to many, across the world, we're seeing this. And I think it's generally here to stay. There'll be some exceptions and we'll see how it plays out. But now the complexity of managing a workforce is harder than ever, right? But the demands from employees are there, and you need to support and respond to people. So I think that's something that we've seen, and Lena is just one of many examples of bringing what's possible with data and the immediacy of it, to bear on a really interesting platform.
Awesome, thanks, Alison. And Matt, what's something you'd like to see a company do, though you haven't quite seen it yet?
I'm super excited about the rise of AI applications. So to the previous question, now that we sort of having our data house in order a bit more, that unlocks a lot of things. One area that I find super cool and interesting and sort of like juicy from an investment perspective is the rise of AI creative tools. To talk about one company I work with as an example, Synthesia is a company that uses AI to help you create a video. So create, avatars that, where you type in a couple of lines of text and there you go, you have like an avatar talking, about what you wrote. So it basically replaces cameras and studios and all those things. So it's super impressive as a technology. But just extrapolating on this and thinking about the rise of like GPT-3 and DALL-E and like that whole thing, like how cool would it be? You're an entrepreneur, you're a founder, and you're like, oh, I need to go fundraising, so like I need to prepare a deck. What if you could just feed into the AI? Okay, here's my website, here's some data, here's my financials, and press a button, and there you go. You got like a 15-slide presentation that basically talks about your business. And by the way, you say, well, I want this, the look to be sort of like clean and fresh. Here is our logo, and then you end up with your presentation like all done, and then you can edit it. But like you have something that takes you like 90% of the way, and that's fundraising. But that could be like any kind of presentation. Like I think we're going to see this very soon, and I think that's super exciting as an area.
Awesome. Great. Maybe another question for the group here. Cloud has made the most cutting edge technology available to anyone, anywhere. Matt, how has the rise of cloud impacted the kind of startups you think about investing in? And how have innovations in cloud impacted your advice to portfolio companies as they build out their products and services?
Yeah. So first of all, I recommend to the startups I work with to not compete directly with big cloud providers, because that may be a hard race to win. But that aside, first of all, I think by now all startups should start building cloud native applications and tools, which sort of sounds obvious, but it really isn't, because especially as you get into more like regulated industries, this has been and continues to be some real pressure to build on-prem tools. So if you go and talk to financial services companies, insurance, government, some others, they will say, okay, well that's great, but like actually we're still not at the stage where we want to move data to the cloud. So there is pressure and temptation for companies to still say, okay, well, we're going to be on the cloud, of course, but we're also going to have like an on-prem, and then you're like in this uncomfortable dance where you try to like keep both things in sync. So I think we are at the stage now where companies, especially early stage companies that really build not just for today, but build for where the market's going to be in like 3, 4, 5 years from now, should build exclusively cloud native applications and products, even if that means that you cannot go after certain opportunities right now. So that's one thought. Another thought, in terms of like advice I give to startups, is cloud providers have provided like all sorts of great tools, including some AI tools, and sometimes you don't need to reinvent the wheel. You can just like leverage those. Like if your business is not to be a speech to text provider, then just like use speech to text technologies provided by GCP and others, which are fantastic products. So just like build this natively and just like leverage the infrastructure that the great cloud providers have built over the years, and that will just accelerate your business. And then maybe as a last thought, this, from a pure technology infrastructure standpoint, I think there's still an opportunity to build all sorts of like cloud native infrastructure tools. So we talked about applications, but like infrastructure to tools. So, in our portfolio, we have a company called CockroachDB, which is a cloud native SQL database, a company called QuickWit, which is a cloud native search for like storage. I think there's still that wave of opportunity where, cloud native tools have are need to be built for all sorts of like different use cases. And I think that's even though that's underway, I think that's still a rich vein of opportunities.
That's great, Matt. Thank you. Yeah, and it reminds me, one of the most common pieces of advice I tend to tell companies too, with respect to cloud platforms and how that impacts, a startup's product roadmap. There is, more often than not, there's a really compelling better together story that can be created with new startups entering emerging technology areas in infrastructure, in cloud, where they could actually find some pretty compelling partnership opportunities with all the cloud vendors and craft that better together story. So I think some really big TAMs out there to go after, which is super exciting for a number of companies. Maybe shifting gears, the funding environment has changed quite a bit in the last couple of months and even weeks. Alison, for the founders out there looking to raise additional rounds of funding or those just starting out, what is your best advice?
Yeah, it certainly has changed. I think but I say that I also still think the core principles and like the first principles of getting started remain the same. And I think there's just a finer point on who are you really building for, right? What is this pain you're solving? So I think and kind of what do you believe is the path to get there over the next several years and really kind of honing that mission. So I think those fundamental principles of great entrepreneurship are unchanged. I think the business model and how you get there, right, are areas that, for some early stage founders, there can be a focus on, and there has been a focus, for growing a user base, but then having monetization potentially follow that growth strategy. And that can be, that can work well over time. But I think there can be more cynicism now about not having monetization be really something that's planned for, built in, and understood from the beginning. And I think especially for consumer-led companies, having a strategy that is much more tuned to product-led growth, which is obviously not a new concept, but I think there is more of an attention on how are you growing organically? How is the product developing a flywheel? And thinking about partnering. We were just talking about the importance of partnerships and ecosystem. All of those pieces are important. Not having a strategy that solely depends upon taking your hard-earned venture capital money and putting it into the major advertising platforms. I think there's a place for that as well. But I think that balance of what is kind of cost-efficient growth and how far is that first round and second round, going to get you moving forward. That said, as much as the valuations have changed, at the same time, we still see great founders with audacious missions and visions and great teams, doing just fine in this environment. So I think in some cases, that correction in some ways, I think is actually quite helpful to the overall ecosystem in the sense of really building sustainable, enduring companies. And I think that's what everyone is here to help do and what we want to partner for.
That's right. And Alison, maybe as a follow-up, how would you expect the way companies raise funding to change over the coming months and years?
Yeah, it's really interesting. I think it sounds like Matt has a portfolio company that we should be using instead of laboring over pitches to create a much more immersive experience to tell a company story. I mean, I think some of the traditional methods and channels, I think, will exist for a long time, right? Getting to know people through networks, through accelerators, incubators, et cetera. But I think with the world becoming so flat and so small, I think you're able to make connections with potentially, different types of investors, alternative investors coming into the market. The syndicates now, I think, are really interesting, right? Made up of strategics, corporates, obviously traditional investors. And I think that's also here to stay. You could see a world where some aspects of venture is even more broadly democratized. And maybe we're all meeting in the metaverse in some way down the road. But I think Matt's idea around how are you creating more immersive storytelling? There's so many incredible creative tools that are out there, more that are being created so that founders can express the vision and mission in a way that wasn't possible before. And I think those are really exciting changes to come.
That's great. Matt, do you have any perspectives on how the funding environment will change over the coming months and years?
Yeah, look, so I think we are at the beginning still of a period of very significant readjustment. I was sort of optimistic a few months ago. I'm much less optimistic now that it might be, like a short-lived sort of like correction. I think this is going to be more profound and going to last longer than I would have liked. I certainly hope that what I just said doesn't age well, and that, at the end of the year, the IPO market reopens and it's all like party like 2021. But I suspect it might not. So it's probably going to get much harder before it gets better. Having said that, look, it's easy for me to say as a VC, but I do think, very much along the lines of what Alison just said, that ultimately I view this as a readjustment, sort of like back to normal, as opposed to the previous situation was normal and now it's crashing. It's sort of the previous situation was crazy in many ways, and now we're going back to something that's much healthier, sane, and sort of what it's been like historically. So look, like in many ways, it's sort of back to basics, right? It's building companies, which whether you're in a bull market or bear market, that's always hard. But building companies with a real product market fit, and then you show up at the round with like real progress and actual numbers. And sometimes it takes a bit longer, and you actually don't need to raise 3 rounds in a year. That's very much 2020 and 2021 that like just didn't happen before. And it's there's like an effort of just going through the various steps and stages of building a company, which is something that we collectively as an ecosystem understand well now. And it's difficult, but that's the way it gets done. And by the way, it equips you to ultimately be a very successful public company, because you just like build that discipline and that rigor over the years, and so that you don't have to learn that like as a pre-IPO company or as a newly public company. So look, again, I don't want to be flippant about it. It's tough. It was kind of fun last year. It's nice as a founder to be courted by VCs all the time. It's going to be more painful now to have to go back, do rounds. Like, I have like this long spreadsheet with like 30 firms, and you talk to all of them, and like 28 say no, one says maybe, one says yes. It's not fun. Like, I'm not saying otherwise, but it's sort of the way the things have worked to date. So again, I've used that as back to normal as opposed to a significant shock.
Well, and I think the one thing I would add, totally agree with that, is I think we've seen entrepreneurship just fly, right? Which is amazing. And I think that's why we're in this industry, is the optimism and the innovation behind it. And I think that is unchanged. Like the entrepreneurial spirit and passion that exists around the world. I think there will just be some more constraints on it in the near term, midterm. And I think you look back to the major market corrections in the past, and some of the most formative, disruptive technology companies were launched in hard markets. And so there's something about, I think it's a kid's book, The Beautiful Constraints. There's been a lot written about what you need to do when you have fewer resources, and how does that get you to focus? How do you think about building the single best product for a very defined segment, and kind of build from there, right? A really important foundation. So there's some things it's definitely harder, but I think for some founders, the constraints and the focus will actually be something that is helpful and additive over time.
Absolutely. It's great. Well said. So to wrap up, I'd like to do a quick lightning round where I ask each of you to vote staying or fading. So we'll start with Alison. Multi-million-dollar seed rounds, staying or fading?
I think it's staying in certain sectors. Certainly we're still seeing it, and especially related to everything in crypto and blockchain. So I think it's staying, and it depends on the sector.
And Matt?
Yeah, I think it's staying. In part for artificial reasons, which is the fact that there's been a bunch of large seed funds that have been raised, and the seed stage is always interesting because it's somewhat recession-proof or bear market-proof, because the theory, which is probably true, is that it doesn't really matter whether you're in a bear market and bull market for seed investment that much, other than the valuation, because it's going to take 10 years anyway for that little seed company to become a public company. So you shouldn't care that much. There's like hundreds of millions of dollars, funds of hundreds of millions of dollars that have been raised just for seed. So I think that's just naturally going to continue as a result of that. So that's not going away.
Fundraising via video conference, Matt, staying or fading?
I personally don't mind it at all. Like, other than the fact that it turns out that like all the people that I invested in solely on Zoom during the pandemic turned out to be much taller than me. Like, other than that part, I've really enjoyed it, and I think ultimately it's a very personal thing. So like everybody says, well, like to be able to like read the subtle cue and body language that you can only really express if you spend time with a person, with a founder in person. That's true, but like it hasn't bothered me that much. I've personally found it to be very liberating. It enables you to do things like, hey, let's do another call tomorrow morning, and by the way, you're in Seattle and I'm in New York, or you're in Berlin and I'm in New York, and we can just go through this opportunity with like a pace of intensity that you would just not be able to do logistically otherwise. So it doesn't really bother me. And like joke aside, I've found that the people that I invested in over video conference, it was not like a major shock when I met them in person. It was actually a very natural conversation. So I'm a big fan of it, and doesn't bother me. And like, as far as I'm concerned, that's going to stay.
Allison?
Yeah, no, I agree. I mean, of course, we love to be in person when we can and meet people face to face and get to know the teams and the companies and see if they still have an office, what the vibe and the culture is like. But no, Matt's right. I mean, I think it's here to stay. And if anything, I think it democratizes the access that entrepreneurs have around the world to investors, because you can be on video conference, any hour of the day. For us, it's opened up the time we've spent in emerging markets, and you can get context in certain markets where you physically can't get to easily. And I think that's an exciting evolution that's here to stay.
Distributed work and teams. Allison, is that going to stay or fade?
Yes, I think it's here to stay. I think it's interesting to see the major companies in the headlines try to strike the balance. As a former operator, I have had some significant teams that were all over the world. It is not easy to manage a totally distributed team. I've managed teams where there were hubs of people in offices, and that can be important for learning, onboarding, the connectivity between people. But I do think the distributed workforce is absolutely here to stay. And obviously there's a whole set of new tools and technologies to bring people together and share goals and outcomes. So I think it's here to stay. And in some ways, I think it's really exciting that a lot of the jobs in technology are now really globally distributed, but it's not an easy task to manage a fully distributed team. So that's something that we have a lot of empathy for, but I think it's here to stay.
And Matt?
So, I sort of hate to give that answer because I'm a big fan of distributed companies and all the things, and I think it's just liberating and all the benefits and everything. I think it's going to fade a lot more than we think, or should be the case. I don't know. Maybe it's just now, but like I'm feeling such a strong gravitational pull back to the office around me in the various companies. And, that's, I don't know if it's correlation or causation, but that happens with this beginning of bear market and recession. And it's a little bit of a feeling of like, okay, party's over now. What were you really doing, when you were not on a video conference the rest of the time, when you were in Miami or, Denver. So I think, I think hybrid work will remain to some extent. I think distributed startups will remain. I think larger companies, once you start having a bunch of people in the office, the people on video will feel like second-class citizens, and the politics will happen over the water cooler. And next thing you know, like everybody will be back in the office for the most part. I think, as much as I don't like the idea.
Okay, and last one, Web3, Alison, staying or fading?
Oh, I mean, I think given the investment, and not only just where you're seeing investment dollars go, but just the talent of folks who are pursuing opportunities in Web3. So I think just based on that alone and kind of where we're seeing the world take shape, that's it. I think it takes time. All of these, these phases really take time to evolve. So the path from 2.0 to 2.5 to 3, is here, but will take time to evolve. But yes, definitely, I think there will be another version of the web that's taking shape. But we are in the very, very early days of even planting those seeds.
And Matt?
Yeah, but I agree. I think we're way past the point of no return. Like some, even if you're super cynical, some version of this will remain. And as Alison was saying, there's a little bit of a self-fulfilling prophecy. There's just, too much money, too much talent, too much entrepreneurial ambition and energy that has been going into this for, this to just disappear and go away. So I don't think it's fading at all. This thing is just like completely anti-fragile, right? Like it's just like the more crisis you have, the more, more of a like, zealous sort of quasi-religious fervor you find in the space. It's just like, so it just like keeps getting stronger. And like you seeing this was like Luna, last week, like it's like, this 50 billion or whatever that just got wiped out. And then like everybody's like, oh no, well, that actually we sad, but like we energized. So it's just completely anti-fragile.
Got it. So a lot of staying, not much fading. That's super interesting. Well, I do want to say thank you to Alison and Matt for sharing perspectives today on trends in big data, cloud, and the VC funding environment. And a big thank you to the Google Cloud and Google for Startups teams for making this event happen. And thanks to everyone who watched this event. Please go to the link below in the session description to check out the VC AMA series, view our past events, and learn about future events that will continue to take place on a monthly basis. We hope to see you at a future event, and thank you all for joining.
Thank you.
Thank you.